Hi, it's me again, Joe Winberg, Bluebird Semaphore. This will be the afternoon edition of Bluebird Semaphore, and it's going to be World History for Ordinary People 26. And I've always been giving thought to, how to give props to the people that I've collected this information from. Now, so I'm going to do something about that today. But I can guarantee you this is not all comprehensive. This is not everything I ever read, every book I opened, every article I peered through that has found its way into World History for Ordinary People one way or another. But periodically I'm going to pick up the books that I did use and put them in front of you for your inspection. Now, I'm very sad that a couple of the books, particularly the ones on the Reformation and early Poland, they've been given back to the library, so I don't have them. I may have talked about them already, though. So, and then today, I went to the library. This is the one in Avalon. It's the only one that you can walk in and actually look at the books on the shelves. Okay? The Avalon Municipal Free Public Library. And even though I don't live in Avalon, because I do live in the county, I was able to obtain a library card. Now, I was there a month ago when I first realized it was open, and there was a book on the shelf simply titled Poland. I said, oh, I could go back because I never finished Poland. And I said I could go back and get that book next time. So I went there. I couldn't get it today. The librarian was extremely helpful. Took a lot of time. We scoured the shelves. Who knows? It'll pop up, and there are certainly other books about Poland. And I want to get that, particularly from what I consider its modern era, which is a lot of, like 1100 to the present, where Poland became Poland, and not just a repository for nomadic tribes to settle in and build up their townships and then go on to become a prominent, if not the most prominent, culture of Europe at that time. Anyway, enough said. So what I'm going to do today, instead of concentrating on East Asia, I'm going to put in front of you some of the books that have led me to do what I'm doing, and some of the magazines that have a vast amount of information about East Asia and the surrounding geographical areas, such as the South Asia islands. So let me get started, but I want to do this in some sort of order that makes some sort of sense to me. So what I'm going to do, folks, I'm going to put Marco Polo in front of you first. And the reason why I'll do Marco Polo first, okay, so this is a soft copy of Marco Polo the Travels. All right, now I had read, this is by the way a Penguin classic, of course, but I had read many years ago the same thing, Marco Polo the Travels, but it was a like 1870s edition, hardback, hardcover, and I read that and I stumbled through it. Although there were footnotes galore in there, but I stumbled through it because I didn't realize that the way his ghostwriter was writing, and that ghostwriter was the person in prison in Genoa that he became pals with, who actually became the writer of the Travels. So by Marco Polo being put in prison when Venice and Genoa were going to war, after he came back from China, he got to meet this guy. Otherwise, we would not have the travels, and we would know very much less about the Silk Road and about China and those places in the 1270s AD. So I read that a long time ago, but I had a lot of trouble with it because I didn't recognize what kind of style is this. Every sentence sounds like every other sentence, and the names of the places you can't possibly know. And they can't look them up because those spellings don't exist. And I've talked about this. It's a problem when you come to try to learn about China. You look on a Google map this day and age, you're not going to recognize anything because they've all morphed. They've morphed from the names of places, have morphed from their old ancient spellings, pronunciations, to some other midway, and now even all that has changed. So good luck. But you get the general geographic areas, you pick up information, and that's what you do. And then after reading that, I picked out another one on Marco Polo, but this is more a person, I believe, giving an historical perspective, not only on Marco Polo, but his fabulous book. This fellow's name is Lawrence Bergreen. Lawrence, L-A-U-R-E-N-C-E, Lawrence Bergreen. Okay, and it's simply called Marco Polo from Venice to Xanadu. Look, you got that name in there again, Xanadu. I love that word. So those contributed quite a deal to my thinking and acquiring some knowledge, as minuscule as it may be. But the book that really, well, they all had similar impact on me. Everything I've been reading about East Asia, similar impact. They always impact me quite a bit. But this book here, and it's called The Pillow Book of Shonagon. Okay? So, I believe my wife put this in front of me close to 10 years ago. And it's never left my side. Never. And the person writing the book is also the main piece of this book. And basically, she was a courtier, 1100s, not 1100s, 1000s, the 11th century in Japan. So she was part of that upper crust. And she was writing from the perspective of the upper crust with all sorts of social commentary, all sorts of nature lore, and in compact little paragraphs. So you could open it up anywhere, read a paragraph or two, and feel like you well spent your time. But why keep it right with me all the time? Not out of the house, but it's always right by my bedside. The reason is because when you open it up and you start reading it, you are transported back to the 11th century. And in these trying times, these, what do they call them? Unprecedented times. There's nothing like being transported back to the 11th century Japan, where the snow is encrusting on the peach and the cherry blossoms, the plum blossoms, the peach blossoms, and where lovers are making their way to each other's apartments sometime after midnight, always to be sure to get out before the cock crows or the sunlight comes up over the western mountains. Now, this is, and it's not just those few things. She talks about how the aristocratic princes and the governors and the emperor and the emperor's wife what their mentalities were all about and some of the things that they did in their culture. And I find it very worthwhile to read these cultural bits and pieces in a very relaxed fashion. There's no scholarly debates going on. There's nothing of not even a pittance of scientific interest. It's just this very fortunate lady telling about the things that interest her. It's wonderful. Some nice little drawings about how their homes were fashioned, and you'll learn a few other things. But this has never left my side since my wife put it next to me about 10 years ago. So, Marco Polo, Sea Shining, whatever. Now I think I can go at this fairly randomly. So, once again, tremendous interest in the Himalayas always in my life. Tibet, Nepal, Kathmandu, the way the villagers lived on those lower elevations going up the Himalayas, and the interaction between the people of the mountains and the people higher up in the plateau, the roof of the world. And I want to take that back. There's a few other places that like to be known as the roof of the world. But this book, The Heart of the World, is a tremendous narrative by a youngish explorer who's looking for this gorge that's more in the eastern Himalayas, more towards Assam, more towards where the rivers eventually fall out of the Himalayas and go down and find themselves moving towards the Bengal. So what happens is, like the river, the Brahmaputra and leads rivers that move towards the Brahmaputra. They go through these passes, but these passes have been inaccessible. Nobody's ever been able to get there. There are stories about one or two explorers before this guy who did get there, but it's all pretty much hearsay. And by the time this guy gets there, near there, the Chinese are having their say. You have to have permits, you have to have this, you have to have that, and so on and so forth. But he actually gets there. It's a very treacherous journey, very treacherous. And along the way, he describes this fabulous land of the Eastern Himalayas. And I believe, and I read this, I don't know, 8 years ago, 5 years ago. The point is, I don't remember if he had to get up into those snow-packed glacial elevations to get through this. I believe he may not have. So he was, but he was going through some very high elevations. He was going through some typically tremendously forested areas. And one of the things that remains with me is him stating how you can get up on one of these ridges and look out and see nothing but the red colors of rhododendrons all over the place. So and rhododendrons, of course, are a shrub of the Himalayas, but this was like monoculture, red. Just how beautiful that must have been. So this fella, and his name is Ian Baker. So he did do it. Fabulous book. Certainly put me in a more generous mood to keep on trying to find out about these places. And very worthwhile, highly recommended. And then I would say, even before any of that, of course, I was reading the great explorer David Livingstone. Okay, now this is like a biography, a little biography, snippets of David Livingstone. But anybody who's interested in exploration, he's got to be put way to the top of your list of people to get to know. David Livingstone. Now, Livingstone, of course, walked across Africa, I believe, 3 times. And this was not my introduction to him. I had read his books, Livingstone's books. I always look for the original writings of the explorers, because otherwise I'm getting a watered down version, secondhand view, blah, 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 blah. Same thing with Richard Burton, Sir Richard Burton, who did East Africa. And his writings are in a book he wrote, Footprints in East Africa. I believe that was the name of it. So you go to the original. You know, if you can't get it, you get what you can get. But when you do get the originals, and then you start to read these biographers and other versions of the history of what went on with these explorers, you can start to judge what's real and what's not real. So always look for that original source and try to read it, do what you can with it. David Livingstone. Now, listen, he's not the only great explorer that you can go reading, and he had his blemishes and his warts too, okay? And I won't go into it because you'll say that I'm biased. But another one of these great, well, he comes right on the footstep of Livingstone, is Henry Stanley. So he, of course, wrote a very famous book about his exploration that took him to find Livingstone in the jungle. You remember the phrase, everybody does. Dr. Livingstone, I presume. But I had probably 10 years ago picked this up at a flea market. It's called In Darkest Africa by Henry Stanley. Okay? And this book had gone missing in my house for quite some time, but only recently I rediscovered it hidden under a pile of other books. And although I had certain troubles with Stanley's writing, his narrative, and it wasn't all that pleasant to me, I found it a little obtuse and a little all over the place and hard to follow. So, but when I picked it up, I started reading it again. And I went right to where I left off. And he had been, by that time, now he's looking for somebody called Ahmed Pasha, who was the governor of a place called Equatoriana, something like that. A big carved out piece of real estate in pretty much Central Africa, a little above the Congo, a little below the Sudan, a little east of the west of the Mountains of the Moon, or Rwanda, and certainly far to the east of the west coast of Africa, but a big, big chunk, and he was supposed to be the governor, and he went missing. So a couple of the worldwide newspaper outlets, and don't forget, we're talking about 1880 or something like that. And, they put it to him, they gave him a price to go out and find him and make stories of it, and they'd be publishing it in their newspapers. I think the New York Herald was championing that cause. So he does it, and after being out there for maybe 1 or 2 years, I forget how long, he decides now he's going to explore the forest of the Congo. The forests, and this is way inland, a huge piece of real estate. He says it a bunch of times, something like the size of France or something like that, huge. But what he found extremely extraordinary about this land, and he was bowled over by it, that this was old growth forest. So Henry Stanley had the good fortune to be sitting in the Congo before that area of the Congo was timbered. Now, the timbering didn't always take place by the commercial interest. The people who lived there did their own cutting down of the trees to make areas where they could have their camps and grow their foods. So we can't just point the finger at those horrible commercial interests. The people themselves did this. And the way he talks about it is validated by one of the anthropologists, one of the better known anthropologists of the mid 20th century. And I think his first or last name is Colin, Colin. And he wrote the people of the forest. He also wrote the people of the mountains. But the people of the forest, and the way he describes them and the way Stanley describes them, perfect match. So we know that Stanley is not giving us a bunch of baloney. We always knew the anthropologist wasn't. So, and he talks about the spectacular, the connection you can make in these old growth forests. You can't make this kind of connection anywhere else in the world. And I was going to read the section because I thought it was one of the best pieces on why original growth trees should be saved. But it's too tedious, about a page. But he's got many pages on this. Certainly, if you're interested in saving what's left of the forests, if you're interested in saving old growth trees, pick up a copy of In Darkest Africa and get into the chapter that he calls Secrets of the Woods. Henry Stanley. I give him a lot of credit. I didn't have that much to say about him because, first of all, I had read Livingstone's accounts of his trekking through the African forests and deserts. And Stanley couldn't, at that time, hold a candle to what Livingstone wrote. So I was, I got to read this guy, come on. But I will finish this book now. And I got to relook for his one on Stanley Finds Livingstone. This is a great cover, though. I don't know if you could tell from there, but it's got the bas relief kind of thing going on there. This is Inundated, Darkest Africa. Very nice. Very nice. So when I started after The Heart of the World, after Marco Polo, after many, many other books, I came across this one. Okay? This book is by Sven Anders Hidden. Sven Anders Hidden. Okay? And it's called My Life as an Explorer. You see that? Now, I think that in the the explorer genre, this guy is probably pretty well known. But certainly I had never heard of him before this. So I read the book and I was fascinated from page 1 all the way through the end. It's one of those books you hate to get to the end because you want to keep reading. But what I found, and I thought quite interesting, was that old Sven was Swedish, and he got to going out into the Central Asia because he had family, uncles and what, who were men of commerce on the west shore of the Caspian Sea. I think if you look at the map, there's a peninsula that sticks up pretty much in the middle of that coast. Fabulous oil territory. And his relatives were trading here. I don't know if they were doing oil. I think they may have. But, so, when he was a young man, he wanted some adventure. They said, yeah, it's okay. Why don't you come out, hang with us for a little bit, and you go back and forget all about it. You go to parties and write poetry or something. But he came and he was just ecstatic about what he saw. He went back. He made preparations for a big voyage. And he does go back, and he does some of the very, very first trekking through the Temecula desert. That's the little desert, and then a little big, huge desert that starts way to the east of the Caspian Sea, right through Central Asia. I want to call it the heart of Central Asia. And I think you've heard me mention Merv, right in the middle of that Central Asian deal, which was the center of the trading, particularly trading going along the Silk Road. Not well known, that whole area, although commerce of the world depended on this stuff. But these people were probably smart, and they kept their knowledge close to the vest. You know, why tell everybody how your success is? Why? You know? Now, so this desert, this is a desert, and you've heard me talk about it before. The name itself kind of implies, like I say, Temacula Desert, the Tarim Basin, blah, blah, blah. But the name kind of implies if you go in, you don't come out. So, treacherous, and he was in all sorts of trouble. Very small party, not a lot of camels, a lot of clanking of camel bells, and a lot of the trek animals dying on the way. Very hard, very hard. But he makes it through it, and this book is his accounting of it. So once again, if you want to read a real-life history of a major explorer, you read this dude. Very exciting. Very exciting. And I'm going to put one more book in front of you, but this is one that I'm still doing right now, and I may have put it in front of you before, the Silk Roads. And notice that this is this author wants to say roads because, you know, for centuries maybe we thought of the Silk Road as this one road from west to east and east to west, but actually it was all these arteries that would feed into the final main artery that went from I can't think of the name right now, but the Kashgar, I think Kashgar, and the Umekis or something, and they're into what is today Beijing, although the Silk Road, yeah, I would say it finally got there, but it was kind of the end of it was more or less where the fabled Xanadu existed, but then those Khan emperors of China moved their headquarters more towards current-day Beijing. Okay, so that last leg, the other one's filtered in, and he starts, and this is what he's talking about. And I have found that I've had to read like maybe 100 pages. I'm not even started because we're just talking about the parts of the roads that were in the West, that were in Asia Minor, that were in Persia, that were pushing into Eastern Europe, even the Balkans, everywhere. Okay, so in order to give a good history and a good accounting of the Silk Roads, he had to do all of that first. And we're just now starting to point away from that and get into what I would consider more Central Asia, more the nomads on top of the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, and we're going to push on further and further. So it's a very detailed history. Once again, Peter Frankopan, The Silk Roads, A New History of the World, because he makes the point all the time that when the folks in Western Europe were dilly-dallying, you know, fighting over whose cave they're going to live in, this was a civilization, big time. All right, so that's that now. Oh, but that's not the whole thing. What's been coming back into my life are these National Geographics, because I'm getting a lot of information from them. And I'll just go through some of what they have here. I'm going to need my glasses. Excuse me. Oh, yeah. And the years of all these National Geographics, and I got a ton more. The ones I have in my hand go back as far as 1919, and up to 1945. Some in the 30s. There's only 4 here, but a lot more. And so I think I'm going to go back to the the 1919 edition. Okay, so that's 100 years ago. And the article in there that I was interested in is called Sarawak, S-A-R-A-W-A-K, the land of the White Raj. And I don't believe I talked to anybody about this yet. But this Sarawak is a sliver of a country, northwestern Borneo. Now, I've seen it on the maps before, but I didn't know diddly about it. And what I learned recently was that the northern piece of Borneo, and then moving towards the east coast of the north, is or was British North Borneo. British North Borneo. So I came to know that more recently, and I saw this. And of course, in the general talking on this article, the Dawaks people start to be mentioned. And goodness gracious, when you read about those folks in my time era, in other words, the last 10 or 15 years, they're always considered, oh, they're terrible, fierce people. Well, they don't seem to be in 1919. I mean, they still did a little head hunting, but they were people just like any other, these primitive people living, in the woods and so on. But and I got to get this out here. Hold on a second. Yeah. All right, here we are. Okay, I got the picture I want, but so this article on Sarawak didn't give me the idea that these people were bloodthirsty, fierce, horrible people. And there were at least 2 other tribes that lived somewhat in harmony with these guys, not a great deal of harmony. And it was, as you would imagine, the people in the middle, as far as warlike, they held their ground with the Dawaks. But the one that were more peaceful, they were always getting in trouble. They were the Putans or something like that. But marvelous article, 1919 February. And the story about the White Raj was that essentially, I think it was 1840-ish. The date is in this article. But the local native, I would say Malaysian Raj, was not really taking care of his country. He was more or less just feeding off the fat of the land. And, finally people got upset with that, including the European nations. So they cut some deal with this guy. They made somebody the governor, the temporary governor, and colonial type governor. And he did so well that when it was done, they made him permanent. Make a long story short, they made him permanent, and he stayed, and he picked the guy who comes after him, whatever they call that. He picked the next in line, all right? And it's kept on till essentially, I think, World War II, the end of World War II, and then that all changed. And so they don't have that anymore. But it was basically, he ruled the country like a Raj. But the people loved him because he did well. They were better off. They weren't as poor. They weren't killing each other as much. So they liked him. He was successful. So he's the White Raj, which isn't a common phenomenon by any stretch of the imagination. So there he is, North Borneo. I get to read about them. And one of the pieces, I'm not going to go into this in detail, but one of the pieces is He's gone as close as he can get to the Mulu Range. So there's a mountain over there called Mount Mulu, the Mulu Range, 9,000 plus feet, and it's old growth forest, 1919 old growth. And once again, the author of this thing is besides himself with the preponderance of beauty that's in these forests, and how the natives consider themselves like living in the godlands, you know, with these tremendous trees and the gods on them and all this. So, you know, there's something to be said about old growth forests. There certainly is. And it's not just one person with an axe to grind. It's a number of cultures throughout history that cherish the old growth forest. And when they were cherishing them in the past, they may not even have been aware that they were old growth. But certainly we are, whatever remains. This was on the island of Borneo, which we know has been ravished by the timber industry. And of course, the other thing I like about reading Borneo is, you know, that was part of Joe Conrad's stomping grounds. But there was another article that maybe was more about Joseph Conrad's stomping grounds. This one on the Seafarers of South Celebes, C-E-L-E-B-E-S, Celebes. Celebes is an island group east of Borneo. And it's extremely oddly shaped, this cluster of islands. And if you really look at it, and it's a large, you know, these islands are pretty large. It's a pretty big place. Borneo is the third largest island on the planet. So this place sitting next to it, if you look at all these islands as one, I mean, that's pretty big. That's a big piece of real estate. But they look like a starfish in motion. You get me? So here's the sleeves, and they have these spirals coming out from the center, right? All these islands. And I'm saying to myself, now this is opinion, not science, not fact. But I'm saying, you know, that looks like, you know, when the earth was being formed and everything was still spiraling, that imprinted on the molten rock that formed somewhere, and the islands built over that. And it still shows up in the footprint of these islands. Now, these certainly were places where Conrad did his commercial mariner's life. You know, he was doing island trading back and forth. And these people were the seafarers of South Celebes were preeminent in their abilities to navigate and do their cargo trading this way and then that way, this way and then that way, the east monsoon, the west monsoon, up and down the archipelago. They also were famous for a type of boat building, and it's called PRAU. And there are pictures of that in this article too. This is January 1945, if you care to visit that. But what I like about this, the close-ups of these ships, these PRAUs, prows, and it's not that word for the Arab boat. It's not. Those are the dhows or something. But the way they put these boats together is just, you can't believe it. They actually look almost like a skeleton of a boat. And I'm told in the article that they took their one-story boats and they looked at the Portuguese who had started coming in there in the 1450s, 1480s, or 1490s, whatever, and they said, well, why don't we put a poop deck on our boats too? So they did that. So the heritage of the Portuguese ships are in these. and these are not the easiest crafts to sail. They seem to be a little cumbersome, but they seem to have a built-in management, built-in repair ability, that you could repair these things fairly easily. You could manage them fairly easily. It didn't take a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to patch up one of these boats. So seafarers are the sleeves. Anything that could work Joseph Conrad into it, I'm all there, all in. Conrad walks on water. Actually sails on water. But and he didn't like to be known as an author of sea tales. Well, what the hell were you? No, they think he was a great, deep, penetrating, psychological narrator. That's what the knowledgeable people say. But for love of a good sea tale, you can't beat him. There's nobody better than him. He's it. So, that was this. And some of these other ones, what do they have? Sarawak, that, this, the other thing. And, 1936 with the nomads of Central Asia. Basically, he picks one leader of a clan, the author, and this Edward Murray. He picks one leader of a clan, and he hangs with him for quite some time, and he gets to see how these people live, how decisions are made, and basically, I don't recollect if they were living in yurts. I recollect seeing some regular kind of buildings, but pretty impressive. And there was a bunch of fine color photographs in there of these people. Fine. So I got to see my Central Asians, which was very wonderful, very wonderful. I tell you, when you've been reading about something, and you're reading about it, but you never really see it, you're envisioning it in your mind. When an opportunity comes up and you get to actually see it, it just makes my day. And last night was one of that. Now, you wouldn't think it, but that TV series, River Monsters, this guy goes fishing for all these bad fish that kill people. Well, he got into Africa around Lake Victoria and the 3 or 4 other large lakes there. And I'm not talking about Lake Albert and Tanganyika. Well, maybe he did go to Tanganyika, but some other ones. And I mean, seeing the upper reaches of like the Blue Nile and the things coming out of Ethiopia and the dangerous spots that these native fishermen have to fish in, crocodiles, hippopotamus, oh my word. And the most fragile canoe-like vessels they got to use. I mean, it's looked like they're on a paddle board, and there's a herd of hippos 75 yards away. I mean, it's tremendous. But I got to see these places where I hadn't seen before. You've heard the term, the water that steams, something like that. I saw these things in this river monster. So kudos to that group. They're getting some very realistic shots of some of the places that are far and wide and outside the normal run-of-the-mill stuff. Now, I've said enough. I've talked about books that I wanted to give some reference to so people could look back on their own, and that I'm not neglecting my responsibility to give shout-outs to all these fabulous authors who write about all these fabulous places. And I hope that these books will someday be read by you, and you will come to cherish the history of the world, and you'll just say, hey, that guy Joe knew what he was talking about, didn't he? Listen, enjoy the rest of the day. I'll see you next time. Thank you.